Okay, so if we focus on this, right? So let's like use like a motivating example. So I had a roommate several years ago. I go out of town, and what ends up happening out of town is that this is several years ago when I wrote a check, right? So check out my bank account, and I see there's this check that's cash. Now the weird part for me is like, what? Like a check? Like I can't remember the last time I wrote a check, and even when this was like 10 years ago. I can't remember who is this check out made out to, right? Like what's going on here? Like did something happen? So what ended up happening is that these checks were made out to my roommate, which kind of weird. I mean, sometimes we did that kind of thing for like bills and stuff. This was in an era before like Cash App and Venmo and stuff like that. So, but they were cashed days apart. So, okay, so like it was like 3 days apart. And the check number was like 30 numbers. So he got like a check at the front of the book and a check at the back of the book to do this, right? So he picks, so they were like 30 numbers apart. And the dates were 2 months apart on the checks. And so, and like the total amount wasn't like a lot. Like I think it was like a total of like $500. But I was in college, and when you're in college, you're broke all the damn time, right? And this falls into the like trap of like, as you may have heard, right? Like it doesn't having $1,000 is not a lot of money. Not really, right? But owing $1,000 is a lot to owe, right? Is a shit ton of money to owe. And so this is like halfway into that. And when you're already broke and you don't have like stable income and stuff like that, I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm like freaking out. I'm like, hey, what? Like, I like texted him. I was like, what the fuck's going on? Like, what? What's the deal here? And he tells me that, oh, I just found these checks. I just found them. Blah 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 blah. And then like I get home and the checkbook that would have these numbers is missing. And so what ended up happening is that he forged my signature. Oh, that was the other part, right? So like the handwriting doesn't match, right? So he forged my signature. And like took out $500 between the two checks. And these are with financial instruments. So at the time, I was living in Texas. So this is not a California thing, right? At the time, this is pre-AB 109, pre-Prop 47. And so what ends up happening is that in the state of Texas, this is 2 felonies because you are like fraudulently using someone's identity, in this case, my signature, my checks, for financial gain, right? So this is like fraud. And so I reported this to the police. Because my mom was like had a lot of pressure like for me to do that, right? So ends up getting reported, and there's a decision point that happens, right? Because 2 felonies, so for it to be a felony, right? So we match like the seriousness part. And, like what that means, right, is that you have a 1+ year in prison, not jail. Or I guess you could have done a state jail felony and served your prison term in jail, but you're looking 1 year in prison for each count, right? So possibly like 2 years. So this dude was in the Air Force as well, so he had a military career to consider. And if he, hey, sorry guys, I can't be in the military. I have to go to prison. He loses a lot of benefits. He loses ties. There was some girl that he was seeing, so maybe he could jeopardize that kind of relationship, right? And so from a judicial standpoint, from a society standpoint, So this is apparently there's no history of offending before, right? So is it worth it to send this person to prison from like a criminal justice standpoint? If we consider like the financial aspect of it, I think at the time it was like $40K a year to put someone in prison in the state of Texas, right? So are we going to spend $80K in prison just to do that? Let alone all of the the court fees and everything else required to do this, right? So there's a lot of different things that can happen in this situation. So in this particular case, so a decision was made, right? Like, so judges don't factor in like the costs and like the housing part, right? But this is just something that's like an overview of like what it costs to send someone to prison in like, in today's society, right? So $80K over 2 years to do this, right? So he was given an option, or he was, basically said this, right? So what we'll end up doing is that because it's a first time offense, relatively minor felony, it's still a felony and you could still obviously go to prison, right? Relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. Like you didn't rape someone, you didn't kill someone, right? And the amount was, kind of trivial, right? In the grand scheme of things. So, obviously it was a lot to me. I was like freaking out, and it was like away, I'm traveling. I'm like, oh shit, do I have any money? Like, period? Am I going to have to get it back? I mean, it was like a whole, God, it was really stressful for me. Like when you're broke and then you find out someone's trying to make you more broke by stealing your money. So like this happens, right? So there's a decision that's made from like a court system. So it was like, okay, you can complete this probation sentence through something called diversion, right? So instead of sending you to prison, we'll put you in the community, right? And you have to meet certain conditions. So you can complete your probation, and when you complete your probation through this diversion process, right? If successful, you don't go to prison, so you don't go to prison at all, and there's no record, which is, man, that's like a big kind of thing, right? There's no record because of it, right? So that's kind of what kind of outlined here, right? And so it's interesting is like because he had to pay like probation fees and attorney fees for this kind of thing, and he ultimately pled down and decided to take this deal. So we'll kind of talk more about this in the next video.